Hi, I'm Nicole Saunders, Fashion Quarterly's editor-at-large, and I'm here with designer James Bush for our Miele designer series. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about James's most recent collection, as well as how to take care of your garments to ensure their longevity. James, how are you today?
Very well.
Great. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about your label, how you launched, and your background?
Sure. So I launched my label a couple of months ago, and I had been working in Europe for the past sort of 7.5-ish years, and originally studied at Massey in Wellington, and came back to New Zealand to launch my business because New Zealand is, I think, a really interesting place in terms of design, in terms of conversations around design. Whereas if you look at somewhere like London or Paris, those conversations have already been had. You know, we know what London design is, we know what French design is. New Zealand design is still being formed. So being part of that conversation is a really interesting thing, I think. I also have a great sort of community support here too, that I really wanted to tap into in terms of starting a business, because like everything, it takes a village.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about your time in Europe, where you were and who you worked with.
So I originally went to Paris and I interned for an Australian-born Paris-based designer called Martin Grant, and then moved to Belgium, where I worked for a designer there called David Zito for 3 or so years. And I hit a point where, his work was very, very technically focused, as was Martin's. So all about cut, all about the body underneath. How do you flatter? How do you challenge? How do you make someone feel fantastic in the clothes, essentially? Before it's about ideology or anything else, it's always about form. So I was really lucky because I got a real kind of education in European traditional craft, which is a dying art, sadly. And at the same time, I come from a family of architects, and I'm always interested in the engineering side of how clothes are put together, much more so than the kind of messaging side or anything. I much prefer the technical.
Yeah, so that's obviously strongly influenced what you do today.
Yes.
Because you do have a lot of kind of sculptural pieces through your collection.
Yes. Yeah. It's probably taken me a long time to understand. You know, you follow your nose at the start when you're young, and you see where it goes, and it's taken me a while to work out how exactly that was going to manifest. Yeah. But I think I have a fairly clear idea now. Mm-hmm. So I then hit a point in Belgium where I realized that if I wanted to keep going, I needed to, or if I wanted to produce the types of clothes that I liked, I needed to go back to school, because my kind of understanding of myself as a designer wasn't quite there. So I went to London to do a master's at the University of Westminster. And then when I finished that, I worked in menswear for a couple of years, first on a British Fashion Council graduate program. And then I ended up as a tailor for film, which was interesting because the grass is always greener between film and fashion. Turns out it's not for me. I'm definitely a fashion designer, but it's good to know that, because I know a lot of people who want to try it or don't, or do it later, or, you know, I'm quite glad I had that experience early.
Is there anything, though, that you took from that experience, though, and apply to what you do today? Or is it quite...
It's just very different, and it tends to be, it's more like a photo shoot, right? So you're about what it looks like rather than what it feels like. Yeah. And because for me, it's about what it feels like. Mm-hmm. You know, a couple of pins ain't going to cut it in the back. So, yeah.
And what's it like being home and being in Wellington and launching the brand? How's it all been?
Well, it's been incredibly supportive, which has been really great, and I guess what I was hoping for. But I was in Paris just last week, and you know, there are things I really miss. But at the same time, there is so much white noise over there. Mm-hmm. There's so much next thing, more things, newer things. There's actually very little time for someone to produce something, improve it, to build slowly and organically, you know, which is supposed to be moving towards a sustainable future. But if you're producing newer, harder, faster still, but you're changing the materials and you're doing it out of sustainable materials, it's still not sustainable, model.
Yeah.
So there's space here.
Yeah, so expand on that, because that whole move towards slower fashion and, owning pieces for life, how does that fit into your philosophy and your design aesthetic?
Well, I think it's essentially exactly what I'm trying to do, because again, it's fit. It's how the most sustainable garment is one that is, you feel good, is one that's cut more than just a t-shirt, one that when you put it on, you feel elevated. And that's always going to be in technique and in cut and fit and drape. So I think from a sustainable perspective, it's not something I pursued, but it's something I've ended up at, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So tell us about your recent trip to Paris and what you were looking for when you were sourcing fabric.
So I was at a textile fair called Premier Vision, which is sort of a major international one. So I was looking for Japanese and Korean textiles because we have a free trade agreement with them. We don't with the EU, so the import tax on that makes it unviable. But also to see what was out there. And it's really interesting at the moment, actually, because so many kind of political issues, you can see them. For example, there was no silk. There was barely any silk. The really high-end Italian places, like the company on the edge of Lake Como, who make all the silk for Hermes, who are lovely, but expensive. They had silk and that sort of ilk, but anything lower down really didn't. And that's because global warming is already affecting sort of Central Asia, where a lot of the silk producing countries are. And the silkworms are dying before they're producing silk. So we're about to go through a massive silk shortage. So then you see that being made up in other aspects. So there's a huge amount of synthetic fibers that are coming through, but based on recycled components. So be it an acetate or triacetate or a polyester or whatever, but they're regenerated or recycled rather than virgin. So that's really interesting, because you start to see those things trickling down. If the designer starts 6 months to a year ahead, or the fabric production, the mills start 6 months to a year ahead of that. So they're even more in advance. So it is interesting to see that stuff coming through. And there was a lot more of it last week than there had been last time I was there. Okay.
So did you make some decisions while you were there on fabric you'll be using in future?
No. So they then, I have samples coming. So I need to then see it. And you've got a month or two before you have to put your orders in. So
okay. And how do you decide?
How do you decide?
Well, what kind of boxes are you looking to tick when you're?
Well, sort of ideally all of them. I think a garment that is worth holding on to, and it's worth looking after, and it's worth keeping and wearing again and again, is one that is a total work of art in a sense. It's a Gesamtkunstwerk. It's completely considered. So for me, it tends to come down with fabric to weight, to surface finish, to fiber content, of course, to wearability, to ease of care. But all of those components have to work for the sum total to be worthwhile. And I only want to produce clothes that are worthwhile. So, all of the boxes would be the answer.
So obviously, for consumers, buying sustainably made fashion is only one part of the equation. When you get it home and you have to care for it, that's a whole other story, and it can be quite overwhelming. Do you have any kind of advice for once your clients get your pieces home, how do they look after them, and how do they ensure that they do last a lifetime?
So, that's an interesting question, because so much of that knowledge, how to care for garments, we're losing as a society. It's not being passed down in the way it used to be because of, all the ease of care machines that are not necessarily that great. I think we're at an interesting point now, though, where we do have new machines coming on the market, like the Miele stuff, which have really specific care cycles and ways of looking after garments. And that, I think, it's almost like it's the grandmother's knowledge coming down through new technology in a washing machine, which I think is going to totally change the game, because the reality is the vast majority of fabrics can be delicately hand washed. They don't need to be dry cleaned. It's just that making sure the consumer has that knowledge or has the equipment at home to do that is sometimes the hard bit from a designer's perspective.
And I think it also comes down to time. We're also time poor. I mean,
Yes.
I know I have garments that hand wash only, but I just want to be able to throw them in the washing machine. You, I know, have actually had some experience with Miele. You had used the appliances when you were in Geneva. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your experience with them? And
Oh, they were great. They were, we had them for 4 years or so, and they were older machines, but they were extremely efficient. Even in Switzerland, they were not that expensive to run, which is saying a lot. But they had a full range of cycles. They were much more delicate, or they were softer on garments, kinder on garments, than anything I'd used before. So I think that they are a manufacturer and technology that is forging the way forward in terms of garment care, and is going to make it so much easier for people to look after their clothes and to keep them for their entire lives.
yeah. So let's talk about some of your specific pieces and putting them through a wash or a dry cycle. I know you've done some beautiful coats. You also have some really beautiful structural garments that I think most people would be like a little bit intimidated to throw in their Miele machine. How do you feel about that, and what do you feel confident having used them? Would you put them in?
Yes, I would, totally.
Yeah.
The truth is it tends not to be the washing, it's the ironing where people come to grief. But in general, not in my clothes. But yeah, so, if you look at that dress, for example, with all the pleating through here and the bust and the skirt and the waist, it's cotton. There's absolutely no reason that a machine is going to mess with that. I do think often with the drying process, I always take stuff out of the dryer or even off the line before it's fully dry, because then you can press when it's still slightly damp and you're not fighting those pushed in creases that are then really hard to get out. It's a much more malleable process. So I think, actually, I do think the Miele machines have a setting on that you can take it out that it will stop before it's fully dry.
Yes, I think that's the great thing about them. There are so many different cycles for both the washing machine and the dryer that you can put almost anything in there and trust it to care for your clothes and extend the longevity of them.
Yes. Yeah. But it comes down really, like, the structure is not, in these, it's not going to be an issue. In a machine, it's if the fiber is cotton or even silk, if you have it on the right wash.
And I think one of the other great functions is that we were lucky enough to go to the Miele showroom and see it all in action, is that you can just put, say, your coat in on a refresh cycle in the dryer. It won't wash it. It will just take out any odor and kind of spruce it up for you.
And particularly, I think coats, there's so little skin contact on a coat, so they actually don't really get that dirty.
No. So the convenience of the Miele machines is that you can do it all at home. You don't need to go out to the dry cleaner. You can wash your most delicate garments and then put them in the dryer, and they'll come out ready to wear. I think for a lot of people, though, the cost of using a dryer frequently can feel a bit prohibitive and can put people off. And then there's also the sustainability as well. Is it sustainable to be running your dryer every week?
Well, I think that's sort of back to the point, really, that they do seem to really be challenging the traditional notions of laundry, in a sense. They have a 10-star rating on their latest range and in terms of energy efficiency. And the dryer, if you use it once a week, will cost you $30 in a year, which is extraordinary.
Yes.
Compare that to dry cleaning.
I know, and I think I don't know a lot about dry cleaning, but it's not an environmentally friendly.
No, it's pretty much the worst thing you can do.
Yes, the worst, isn't it?
Yeah.
How would you describe your label's aesthetic? You obviously, if we look at these gorgeous pieces you've got here, they're timeless. You'd pull them out of your wardrobe and wear them again and again, and that talking to you, that feels very intentional. You're creating these pieces that you want people to go back to wear season after season.
I think I'm trying to design clothes that, in a sense, demand respect from the consumer, in that they are clothes that are worth, the design is considered, the fit is considered, so they're worth respecting as objects. There's definitely tailoring is a way of fitting cloth. Dressmaking is a way of fitting cloth. They're quite different. I think I'm really interested in the language of menswear, because menswear, the stitches, the seams, the lines, there's a real social language and conversation that goes around men's clothes. Women's clothes tend to be a lot more about fit and cut. So I like to bring the language of men's tailoring and menswear, and then combine that or juxtapose that with dressmaking in women's wear. So there's a hardness and a softness, a tension and a release, that kind of, it's not necessarily, it's not like you can see the men's elements to that, but then there's a softness to the line, there's a softness to the waist. So it's that juxtaposition, which actually, going back to where has my style come from, given I went down the women's wear clothing and then ended back in menswear. Now I think about it, it's quite perhaps that's coming through.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today, James, and telling us about what you've been up to in your collection. And thanks for joining us, viewers. Keep a lookout for James in our upcoming spring issue of Fashion Quarterly, on sale 5th of September.